welcome back to a bit of a challenge, with a bit of an introduction. You see, the fastest road cars in the world are things like the Koenigsegg Gera RS and the Chiron 300 Sport Plus thingy. And these can just about crack 300 miles an hour or get very close to it. But it doesn't match the land speed record, which is the Thrust SSC, remaining the only car at this point in filming to have cracked the speed of sound, and it is the only vehicle, in fact, to ever reach Mach 1 on land. So, that got me thinking, could we break the sound barrier with a car? Now, obviously, you can't do that in Forza, however, we do have another game, Beamng.Drive. So, I hopped on there, built some cars, and tried it out. Starting out with the Barstow Dragster. I figured this was going to be one of the fastest cars, like stock cars, in Beamng. So I gave it a little bit of upgrading, lightened it a bit more, try to make it a little bit more aerodynamic, stuff like that. And I want to see how fast we could go. I picked the empty plane. It's perfectly smooth, it's pretty much endless, it's exactly what we need. And this thing went very fast. Accelerating wasn't really what we needed. It wasn't really enough. You see, problem was the gearbox. You see, while the ultimate speedrunning cars have jet turbines, this has an engine. Which means it was going to be a little bit tricky to try and beat it. Now granted, we are hitting 300 plus miles an hour, but that does mean the engine explodes. Because the gearbox over-revs and, well, blows up. It just gets too high. Which means we have to rely on a different set of power. See, I tried running it just with the gearbox first to see how close I could get with a car of this quantity, but it wasn't really working. So, I had to cheat. And if you look in the bottom left, we have this little wind thing. Lets you control how much wind you have, how fast it is, and what angle it's going. So I simply put it behind the car and threw it up to 470 miles an hour and hoped we could use the 300 mile an hour boost as well as the 470 mile an hour push to maybe get it to the supersonic barrier, but that didn't happen. After many miles of just gradually increasing speed up to 357 miles an hour, which is incredibly fast for a road car, because remember, this is still a Beamng car from the game, just with some tuning and a wind addition. And it's getting 357 miles an hour, that's pretty darn good. But in the end, it would be, the wheel fell off. It still went over 270 miles an hour without a front right wheel, but yeah, having the front wheel fall off would generally be considered the end of your speedrunning efforts. Our next car is, well, quite different, but equally wedge-shaped. It is the Bull line. Now, this is the special edition version called the Drag version. I'll have a link for it in the description. It is a mod. Hopefully I can find it anyway. This is incredibly powerful, and it looks incredibly aerodynamic. It can easily cut through like a knife edge. It also has NOS, very high running gearbox. It has a very long final gear, so it should be ideal for speedrunning. And, well, it's not bad. The NOS does like to slightly blow the engine up, but it actually held together despite the smoke. And we're getting up to some 240 miles an hour with just the engine alone. It is a bit wobbly, quite a bit wobbly. I was surprised, given how it's a supercar, so it should be pretty stable at 270, but no, it was not. It was very floaty, shall we say. I did eventually get it under control, but we weren't really making much progress. So I had to pause it and just ratchet up the wind. We actually still had a working engine at this point, which is progress over the Dragster from last time, but it was not really going faster. It did, though, get straightened out by the wind. It was much more stable once the wind hit it, which is probably the only car of the day, if I recall, that actually had the wind increase stability. We'll get to that later. But we just now cracked the 300 mile an hour barrier, and it's just not really going. Apparently, just like real life, the wedge shape is not as streamlined as you would think. So we're just starting to crack the R10, and it's not going to do it, unfortunately. Bit of a shame for the Bullide. I had good hopes for this thing, but to no avail. Our next car was a bit of a disappointment. This is another in-game car, although it has a modded tune for it. So it's got a twin-turbocharged, nitrous-fueled V12. And as you can see, I have stripped it out to the bare bones, completely, as little weight as I possibly could, pretty much. And again, I thought this would do pretty well, because this is some of the high-speed, like, ultra-top speed cars. One thing I must have forgotten, maybe, I must have forgotten the radiator or something, because it didn't last very long. I got up to 214 before the engine exploded completely. So I thought, well, maybe I'll use that boost from the wind. No. For some reason, this car just did not pick up speed. It was not very fast accelerating. We're not even hitting 200 miles an hour. We never got past 215, in fact, on this entire run. So the ETK K-Series, it was a disappointment, shall we say, and especially the police car was not going to be catching that Bullide anytime soon. And we start this next one with a Formula 1 car. Now, initially, I tried using the tuning settings to lower the downforce as much as possible and increase the gear ratios because it's a Formula 1 car. And, well, that caused quite a bit of wheel spin. As you can see, I'm in first gear, twitching around like mad. I eventually get it in a second, which spins out even more, but I keep it under control. I'm in first again, for some reason. Second, we're in third, yeah, wheel spin in third gear. Okay, completely lost control. That is not good for a speedrun when you get wheel spin in third gear. So I was trying, let's just short shift to third. That'll work fine. Nope. That was a spin out. Let's try it again, be a bit more careful with the throttle maybe. It's a little hard with this controller, but we'll try and be more careful with it. And we actually did make progress. We're in second, making good. In third, good. We're getting 130 already, 150. We're in fourth, wheel spin. Fifth, more wheel spin. Sixth, more wheel spin. And seventh gear, we spin out and destroy the car. When you get wheel spin in your seventh gear, aka your highest gear, and you destroy your car completely, you maybe need to reset the tuning settings. Because I was tinkering with the tuning settings to see if I could maybe get a bit faster. No. So I simply just reloaded the default tune that I had on it and left it at that. Because, wow, was it uncontrollable. And you know what? Sure, it shook itself to bits, but it was a bit better to drive. Quite a bit better, actually. I could actually get the power down once we hit fourth gear, which was nice. We're in fifth and sixth, and now we have a problem. The gear ratios are too short. So I thought, well, maybe I'm going 250 miles an hour. Why not just hit the wind? That caused really big issues. Yeah, you see, the aerodynamic properties of this game don't like it when a Formula 1 car gets hit by wind, and the Formula 1 car likes it even less. And then we turn into a helicopter. Feel free to go frame by frame and how many spins that was, because I don't even know. And I was editing the video. That is, I don't know how many G-forces that is, but it did turn the entire car body into a canoe. So I would imagine many G's. Yeah, I've never seen that. So, note to self, don't play with the wind on the Formula 1 car, which is a problem because we're still not close to the sound barrier yet. Yes, I am using the Dodge Viper because it actually came with a top speed tune on it. And then I just did some further weight simplifications and left it at that pretty much. So this is, I think, twin turbocharged V10 with nitrous. Not that I ever really used the nitrous, because as you can see, there is quite a lot of wheel spin. A lot of wheel spin. Like, the incorrect amount. Not quite as much as the Formula 1 car with no downforce, but a lot of wheel spin. We're getting fourth gear wheel spin there. We do eventually somehow bring it back from under control from that spin out. I don't know how I did that, but I made it work. We are in fifth gear with the NOS. We are actually using the NOS now because we are starting to top out. Now, just because we're topping out doesn't mean that we're not increasing acceleration. We are. We're still hitting 250 miles an hour at this point. But we are starting to run out of gears in 5th gear. I'm pretty sure the Viper has a manual 6-speed, but whatever. We're topping out in 5th gear. So I decided to be sneaky and use my sneaky wind tactic. And it does get it a little bit faster, but if I'm honest, we're actually going backwards in terms of speed, because at least the drag cars were hitting 300 plus. These things, no. They're struggling to crack 280. In fact, this one doesn't really crack 280 very much. It's not the greatest, I'll be honest. So eventually I gave up in a manic defeat for the mighty American muscle car. Yeah, the Viper was not fast. In relative terms, 270 miles an hour is still blitzing fast. So clearly the internal combustion engine was not going to be enough for this, and frankly the wind was not enough either. Which means it is time for rocket power. We're actually getting to that point. We have JATO rockets. We're going to see what we can do, and I figured I would start off with the bus. Yes, it is as aerodynamic as a barn, but it does have a ram plow on it, which should help with aerodynamics. And it has, rocket engines, which will also help. And it has a very flat back end, which means it should get a lot of push from the wind. And it's very fast, even with the rockets. It's hitting 230, 250, 270. The tires aren't actually being deflated, but it's fine. We're hitting 350, 370. We're hitting 400 miles an hour almost before we actually run out of boost. And then we begin slowing down because of the sheer weight. Also, the bus did survive. It rolled over, but it did actually survive the journey, technically speaking, because that was one of my side goals, is to at least have a vehicle sort of survive. The tires and suspension were going to have issues, no doubt, because the game was not designed for it. But if I can make the engine survive, I would call that a success. And it actually did survive. The engine was fully functional, and the steering worked as well. The problem is, as you can see, those are not where the wheels are supposed to be. I don't know how that happened. I know the tires deflated, I know the brakes blew out, but I didn't know that the wheels would just crush in on themselves when you were speedrunning, but apparently that can happen if you're speedrunning a bus with rockets on it. So, we need another plan. Which is why I decided to use a little bit of rockets and use the wind as well. So it was all about trying to get as much speed as possible. The problem is we just run out of boost. We run out of rocket fuel, which no one has ever said in the history of bus work, but we are running out of rocket fuel on our bus, which means he can only crack 390 miles an hour, and then the tire properly brakes on us. Amazing we didn't roll over that time. But yeah, that's a very unhappy rear axle. I don't know how that happens. It actually looks very stable. It drives pretty darn good, and then the entire axle just collapses in on itself like a black hole. I don't know. The bus was strangely the fastest vehicle so far. It got to almost 400 miles an hour, but even still, the mighty rocket-powered bus was not enough. So our next vehicle is a bit more sensible. This is a Beamng Dragster. So not only does it have the Dragster engine with the supercharger and the nitrous, it also has a JATO rocket strapped to the roof, which is the best of both worlds, in theory. And it actually worked quite well. I had a good plan. My plan was to use the engine and the NOS to get me up to as fast a speed as possible as a preempt, and then hit the rocket and send us off into orbit. I don't know why I left the tow hook on there, but I did. I must have done it on accident. But yes, technically you could tow a trailer with this. I would not recommend it. That's actually a good idea from later. But anyway, I'm getting distracted. Yes, the engine was a monster. I accidentally did leave it in neutral the first time, which is not a great thing to do, leaving your engine in neutral when you launch it with a rocket engine. But, yeah, I mean, it got to 140 miles an hour in the first few seconds, so I figured I'd just try out the rocket engine. And it is very fast. It actually has a lot of rocket power as well. And we're getting up to 300 miles an hour, 400 miles an hour, and then the tires explode. We're getting up to 500 miles an hour with no front tires. It's fine, though. Then the rear tires exploded, and, we made a new Tesseract. Or maybe it's the, block thing from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I'm blank on the name, but anyway, that would become a bit of an issue. You see, the car could just about withstand the rocket power and the immense speed, the tires could not. The tires would physically burst, and once your tires burst at 650 miles an hour, it does tend to catastrophically burst. It blew out all the fenders, the windows, tore the entire tire off, and yeah, it generally caused havoc, so I still left it in neutral because I'm an idiot. The thing was wheeling with nitrous, which is always scary, wheeling with a rocket engine strapped to you, but it made it work somehow. And the wind, well, it helped it a fair bit, but as you can see, it's not very controllable. So I wanted to see what was going on with the car, just to make sure what was happening, you know, I understood it. And you can see, once you're getting to about 400 miles an hour, the front suspension does get very unhappy with you, because the rocket engine pushes the car to the ground, which is great. However, the suspension can't handle that, it just has too much force, so it blows the tires off. Actually, very cleanly blows the tires off through the fenders, but whatever. So we keep going with the rocket power and the wind. We're getting up to 500 miles an hour now, and this is when the rear tires start to get unhappy with you. And they have, instead of just, you know, blowing off and flying backwards, these things catapult you sometimes. And I do mean that in the literal sense, because as I was doing this run here, this was run like 6 or whatever, I did a lot of runs in this car, it blows the front right blows, causes a collapse, and then the rear one goes, actually relatively cleanly, and then we have no steering and we're done. It just spins. Yeah. Bit of a problem. The thing can actually front flip. I did a front flip with when the rear tires burst one time. Not fun. Generally causes problems for speedrunning efforts when you front flip. It really wanted to. It really, really wanted to, but it just couldn't do it. The tires were not durable enough for the speeds. No matter what I did, I tried my best to get lucky with the tires. That's pretty much the only thing you can do, is get lucky in hopes that the car would stay straight enough after the tires exploded and it would keep going. And I did get up to 715 miles an hour. But it wasn't enough. It was some 50 miles an hour short, which 700 odd miles an hour is incredibly fast for a glorified skid. But it couldn't do it. It did not have the tires, and that would be the Blue Box fatal undoing. Well, maybe the muscle car couldn't do it, so what about a van? You see, this is the Cashiera. This is the hill climb version. I also threw on the rocket engines just for good measure, and there are 2 rocket engines on this vehicle, which means it is very, very fast, but it's also still a van. And unlike the Blue Buck, the wind does not help with the controllability at all, in fact. It may just be one of the least controllable vehicles in the history of this game. Because you go here, you hit the wind, and, well, it's a van, so it does tend to wander about. And then the wheels explode in a catastrophic fashion, not even like the Blue Bucks. They properly explode instantly. And if you happen to be using the rockets during this time, sometimes the rockets will, cause you to fly. As the next run I did demonstrate. You see, the wind will cause great instability and a great rollover, and if you happen to have the rockets going while you're rolling over, there is a chance that they might fly. See, I was using the rockets to slow it down, and I might have miscalculated ever so slightly. And then we flew. I mean, it's a very spectacular flight. It's actually a really good flight. But it did have to land at some point, and that was a very painful landing. That might be some of the most rolls we've ever had. Ever. The wind didn't help. I realized I still had the wind on, so that definitely did not help having a 470 mile an hour tailwind hit you. But that's a lot of rolls. Again, just like the Formula 1 car, I don't know how many spins or rolls that was, But it was a lot, and the car was not in good shape after that. There was not much left intact. The driver's seat was fine. If you exclude the G-forces, the driver might have actually survived that. That is the only thing to survive that, except for maybe a rear wheel. Yeah, the problem is the wind was very unstable, and it helped you a lot get the boost up, but it caused a lot of instability with the van. For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe going 700 miles an hour in a van with a 470 mile an hour tailwind was a problem. You see, these rockets do not have the same longevity as the Blue Bucks. And another problem is not just the rocket longevity, it's the tires. The Blue Bucks tires gave out in a much more controllable manner, all the things considered. These just explode instantly. They just vaporize and ruin your run completely. So, could you get this vehicle to 700 miles an hour? Possibly, yeah. If there was an infinite tire mod, a lot of these vehicles could probably break the sound barrier. But the tires just can't cope. They explode into a bazillion pieces, which is not good for your run, and means both the van and the Blue Buck can only get about 700 miles an hour, which is still about 50-60 miles an hour short of what we actually need, unfortunately. Which brings us on to our final car. This is called the Gravel Vertex, if I recall. And it is a very bland-looking sedan, but it has 2 rocket engines shoved on it. And it has a very special feature called the Zero Drag Body Kit. So, if I'm reading it correctly, I think that's how it works. This body has no air forces acting on it at all in the game files, which means it can go as fast as it damn well pleases. Combine that with a very powerful engine, and of course 2 rocket engines for good measure. It was quite quick. We're at 500, everything explodes, but we do hit 500 miles an hour. And then it's all a matter of keeping up that speed. So you just had to be strategic with the boost, because it keeps spinning like mad, but it does actually straighten out after a little while. So, it was all a matter of, could you control the spinning black thing of death? And you can. It's 800 miles an hour, 850, and then the rockets run out. But we did it! We technically made a car hit 850 miles an hour. We broke the sound barrier with what's left of a very glitchy car. The tires continued to explode, but we did it. We hit the sound barrier with a car, and we're actually trying to slow it down with the wind, which with a zero drag body is a bit trickier than I was expecting. But we did it. We broke the sound barrier with a car. Now the only challenge was trying to make it survive, at least the engine. So that means you couldn't use the engine at all in the beginning, which was not as bad as you would expect, because you were mainly using rocket power at this point, rocket power and wind. So it was all a matter of just trying to get it right and trying to get it controllable, and that's what's the biggest thing. You see, when the tires exploded, you had to make sure that the car was pointing in the right direction when you boosted. That was the key. Or, you could do a bit of trickery, because it also has another version of this car called the God Mode car. This basically makes every bit on the car as strong as humanly possible. It can still go wrong, it can still explode, it can still cause issues. However, it is basically invincible for all intents and purposes. And I started out relatively simple. I tried to use the wind to get as much of a rolling start as I could, and then fire the rocket engines to try and make it survive as best as possible. It was actually very aerodynamic, hitting over 200 miles an hour before it even hit the rocket engines. It was very, very good. And since it was a God Mode car, the tires were a heck of a lot stronger, which means they would last longer in terms of top speed. So, it was all a matter of, well, just how fast could you go, and could we get an engine to actually survive this thing for once? Because we know it can hit 850 miles an hour, but can it survive hitting 850 miles an hour? That is the question that we had. You see, we were only going 300 miles an hour to start with, and then we hit 500, then we hit 600, then we hit 650 miles an hour before the wheels blow up. We're hitting 850 before the actual tire completely gives out, and then we're rolling. But if you look, the rims actually stayed intact, which is great, because that means I have steering. And that means I can try and get this darn thing under control, and it does. We get to 900, 950 miles an hour before the boost runs out. But we hit 950 miles an hour with a car that still had rims. The tires were all shot to pieces and glitching the universe out, but it was actually still working. It had brakes, it had rims, and critically for this test, it did have an engine, and I turned it on, and it worked. And we actually had some form of drive. It spun the wheels up. It actually can move if it wasn't for the, well, glitchy physics. So, you can indeed get a car to break the sound barrier. But it is a bit tricky, as you can see, and it does tend to cause reality to break a bit. But you can do it. You can break the sound barrier with a car quite significantly, actually. Mach 1.5 is not bad at all. But that is going to be it, though, for this episode, and I'll be back with more.